Let's have a nice cup of TRE in the afternoon with Hannah Murray.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Nadia Kamies, who graduated from the University of Cape Town as an occupational therapist and worked extensively with children before turning her focus to writing. Her memoir, Off Centre and Out of Focus, is a profound and moving meditation on what it meant to grow up laboured coloured in South Africa under apartheid. The book uses oral history and family photographs to access stories about race, identity and belonging. Welcome to the show, Nadia.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So what made you want to write this book and tell your story?
I think probably the most immediate motivation was having two children who were at high school at the time and were supposedly growing up in a democratic South Africa. And there was not a lot of evidence of that. You know, there were still incidences of racism occurring on a regular basis. And when I thought about it, it made sense that we hadn't had these conversations. We'd gone so abruptly from an apartheid government to a democracy, but the sort of bridging conversations had not happened. And I'd always tried to make sense of the world through writing and journaling, and so it seemed the logical step for me.
Yeah. And was it difficult raising children there at that time, trying to explain things that you wanted to explain and maybe not things that you didn't, I guess?
They were both born sort of just at the dawn of democracy. And so things were, on some level, things were changing quite rapidly. For them, it was having this access to schools that had been almost completely for whites only, and that they were now able to attend. But I think they have both been fortunate to grow up with parents who were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, and so it was something that we talked to them and consciously tried to have conversations around and to expose them to diverse kinds of thinking, diverse people and diverse experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess they had a very different childhood growing up to what you did then.
Yes, completely. And to come back to schooling, I mean, I went to schools that were reserved for coloreds only, and by colored I mean the official apartheid racial designation, along with white and black. And so there were schools reserved for different racial groupings, and with that went certain resources. So if you were black, you would receive the least resources in terms of libraries, science labs, for example, for qualified teachers, a little bit better if you were colored. And then obviously if you were white, you received the best education with the best resources. And so those schools were obviously on a completely different level to what we went to. So after democracy, we were able to send them to far better schools than we'd ever dreamed of.
Yeah.
And to live in a neighborhood that, that was previously completely unavailable to us.
Mm. And for you growing up like that and being sent to different schools, was there a big sense of injustice? Did you know and feel like it was wrong to be separated like that? Or was it just your normal?
Yeah, on many levels it was the normal, but obviously you came face to face with apartheid legislation in terms of not being able to ride on a bus or take a train in the same carriage as as a white person, or have access to go to the movies, restaurants, all of that. So there were those daily reminders of apartheid. But probably for me, being the first person in my family to go to university, and because I studied occupational therapy and it was only offered at the white University of Cape Town, I needed a special government, a permit to go there. And so I think at the age of 18, when I entered university, I sort of came very close to it, being able to sit next to people in class or go to the library or on the university shuttle bus, people that I would not have been able to sit next to in movies or on the train. So that, I think, really brought it home, and the fact that I needed a permit, even though I was academically good enough, because of the color of my skin, I was not allowed to be there.
Yeah. And was there any kind of understanding as to, I mean, I know you say it's because of the colour of your skin, but obviously now, thankfully, we understand that that's not a reason to separate people, of course. And, but did you feel that there was a reason why you were separated? Did you understand the reasoning, or did the whole thing seem totally baffling to you and your friends and your family?
No, we were very much a police state, and so there was a lot of fear amongst ordinary people, and especially in my family with my parents and my grandparents, this fear of us being involved in the anti-apartheid struggle was very big. And so going to university also opened that up very much for me. So and the injustice of it. And so I became much more aware and much more involved then, because I was doing occupational therapy. The organizations that I got involved in were organizations around healthcare. And, the civil society was very big in the anti-apartheid movement. So there were organizations that were based around trying to get better education and housing and healthcare and sanitation and water. And so I think probably around those late teen, early adult years was when I became a lot more aware of what was going on.
And did you have white friends? Were you able to mix at all?
I did at university, yes. And because we were a small class, because occupational therapy had an intake of about 25 students, so I think it created, I suppose, some kind of a sense of community, that because we were so small compared to the big university, that I did make friends, yeah.
Yeah. And was this something that you'd discuss amongst your friends?
Not often, unless they were also involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. But it was not something that was openly. I think there were sort of different levels of, because you were there almost on a kind of sufferance, and so there were certain roles that you played, and there also there was the fear that governed, like who you could talk to, and you could be arrested for wearing the wrong T-shirt, or, for example, or there were organizations being banned on a regular basis. And so there was always that level of reserve also governing friendships, governing interaction. And just these daily reminders of being in this place that you didn't quite belong. And so you had to be on your best behavior, not draw attention to yourself, and so on.
And was there ever any thought, either with you as you were growing up into university age, or with your parents, of leaving the country, of moving somewhere else?
Personally, no, because we would not have been financially able to go. And secondly, where would we go? There were sort of times in the history of the country when people were going to places like Canada or Australia and even the UK. But for us as a family, we didn't have the financial means to even consider that.
And how about now? How do you feel about your country now and how it's changed?
I feel very proudly South African. We have many issues, which I think, it's only 32 years after democracy, and I think people underestimate how very sophisticated apartheid was and how deeply it divided people on all levels. And so I'm aware that it's going to take generations probably to make things better. And also, I think probably what is standing in the way a lot is the economic apartheid that we kind of forget about often. We think about apartheid in racial terms, but economically, things haven't changed a lot for the majority of the population. I was fortunate that I was able to go to university and in that way change my circumstances and that of my children, and that they've been educated and they were able to do postgraduate studies in the UK, and so that is slowly how you change that economic status, and it's very difficult for someone who's grown up in a very poor township in informal housing to move out of that space without any assistance. And so largely, especially in Cape Town, which is still very segregated, the best houses, the best neighborhoods, the best schools, the businesses are all still white-owned. But I also, from a personal point of view, can see how far we've come. If only just to look at the opportunities that my children have had and how differently they've grown up to what I did or my parents did. And so there certainly have been many positive changes, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
I can't see myself living anywhere else.
That's amazing. I do find, obviously I'm an expat. I left the UK and I live in Spain and happily so. I think it's incredible to have been through what you've been through and been grown up in that segregated environment and made to feel that you're not as important as people with a different coloured skin, that you still feel proud to be South African and proud to live in your country. I think that's amazing.
I think amazing things have been done over time. People have really struggled. People have died and suffered. People were detained, went missing, forced into exile, so that we could have a better country. And so I think that is what gives me hope that sort of in the darkest days of apartheid, which when we thought nothing would change, things came together and it did. So
yeah,
I think hope is a game changer.
Definitely. And in the book, you talk a lot about various different stories about race and identity. And have you thought a lot about your own identity and belonging through the writing of this book?
Yeah, it was very much a personal sort of journey, because when I started writing it, I was never going to do a PhD. I was going to do my master's in creative writing, and then I was going to write this book. And along the way, I just realized how little I knew, and then allowed myself to be convinced to study further. And it was the right decision because it gave me sort of the focus and the structure and the resources. But for example, we had more than 200 years of slavery in this country. And it was something that was completely excluded from our school curriculums. And, I personally can trace my father's side of the family to an enslaved individual. And so that very much, I think, was an awakening of the history and the intertwining of the history and the whole reason, or a big reason why the Afrikaner people found it necessary to separate themselves so completely, because they wanted to create this myth of an all-white race. They needed to distance themselves from slavery and the mixing that had occurred during slavery. So that was a sort of, that was quite an eye opener for me, because we knew so little about it. And yet it laid down the fundamental notions of race and identity in the country. So learning about that background, also the difficulty of actually trying to access information. There's very little in the official archives, because slaves were listed as property of their masters, or they're only written about in court records if they did something wrong. So that is why I turned to photographs and to talking to people and trying to record their stories and piece together stories, for example, of my mother's cousin marrying someone who was from the Netherlands, and breaking all kinds of apartheid laws, about immorality laws of not having sex across the color line, or there was a Mixed Marriages Act, and you couldn't get married to someone, and if you did, you couldn't live in the same area. So there were about 4 or 5 laws that they were breaking just by having a relationship and getting married. And of course, she was forced to then go live in the Netherlands. So those kind of things, I think, were just sort of waiting to come out of these photographs. I did a lot of the research by talking to friends and people in the community, and I started by asking them to bring me a photograph that in somehow represented heritage to them. And these are the kinds of stories that came out of that. The wedding photo of my mother's cousin and her husband. Things like my birth certificate that list my mother as Cape Colored because she was Christian, and my father as Cape Malay because he was Muslim. And those artifacts just hold so much history. It's an ordinary archive that I was forced to draw from.
The fact that some people still can't move on from the segregation or the way that they've been brought up and feel that people should be separated, I suppose that would go both ways. We assume that it's the whites that still feel that way about not wanting to immerse together, but I assume that some of the black community may well feel the same about not wanting to integrate with white people after they've been treated so badly for so many years, which makes total sense.
On some level, yes, probably, but I think there's more motivation and desire, I think, from Black people in general to build the country, because this is where they've always lived. This is the place they know, and they do want things to change.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of my generation and my parents' generation, it's probably more difficult. But definitely amongst the young people. There's a rising consciousness and awareness and a desire to be more integrated.
Well, if people want to find out more, they should definitely get a copy of your book. It's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's called Off Centre and Out of Focus, Growing Up Coloured in South Africa. And it's by Nadia Kamies, who we've been chatting with today. Nadia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah.